Hi and welcome to Sword vs. Dragon, where I show you why Dungeons & Dragons is a badly designed game and how I fixed it in my own game, Ishanekon World Shapers. Today we're talking about the broken foundation of Dungeons & Dragons, what everything else is built upon, the ability scores. Why do I say they are broken? Mostly because they are not balanced against each other. Some stats, no matter what kind of build you are just way more desirable than others, while some are borderline useless unless you have a very specific class or subclass. It starts with the fact that 3 saving throw types are way more common than the others. I'm speaking about Dexterity, Constitution, and Wisdom, unlike Strength, Intelligence, and Charisma that only rarely come up, and that's designed on purpose this way. So these other stats better have something to make up for it, right? Well, let's go to each one of them individually and look at the problems and look at how I fixed it in my own system. Let's start with Strength. What advantages do you gain from Strength? As I already mentioned, is one of the rarer saving throw types, so it's better it has something to make up for it, right? It grants you bigger inventory space, which, let's be honest, the inventory system of Dungeons & Dragons is pretty overcomplicated, not really easy to use when you're using pen and paper, and most people ignore it anyway. And also, even if you have a low strength level, you usually have more than enough inventory space for everything you need. Unless you're carrying heavy armor with you, which would be the second thing that strength is good for. It prevents negative effects from wearing heavy armor. So yeah, if you're wearing heavy armor, you need strength. And then you use strength for most melee weapons. But the thing is, ranged weapons tend to be better in Dungeons & Dragons, because of the limited mobility, because of attack of opportunity and so on. It's usually more effective to keep your range, shoot at the enemy, and thanks to the sharpshooter and crossbow expert feat combined, your max damage output is roughly the same as the potential damage you can do with melee weapons. And in melee weapons, you still have finesse weapons, which are just as effective as strength weapons, which means Dexterity gives you far more effective combat options. The only thing that Dexterity does not give you are effective two-handed weapons. But again, sharpshooter and crossbow experts basically deals the same amount of damage. Plus, with crossbow expert, your range attacks even become effective in melee range, making melee strength weapon pretty much obsolete. Or okay, you have throwing weapons, but the problem with throwing weapons is that you cannot pull them out quickly enough. As soon as you have extra attack and you throw your throwing weapon, you only have half your damage potential because you cannot pull out throwing weapons quickly enough. So they're not an effective combat option, especially on higher levels, unlike Dexterity-based ranged weapons, if you're playing efficiently. Then it allows you to jump further, which is a decent bonus, I admit, but you only get one skill, Athletics, which has its uses, to be honest, but is not the most used skill. So it's kinda lacking in the skill department. Now if we look at Strength in Ishanekon World Shapers, it still gives you the inventory system, but the inventory system is far more simpler, easier to use, and more importantly, limited. If you have low strength stat, you will feel it in your inventory limit, making it far more costly to drop that stat. Also, you have some decent strength-based range options, like the longbow for example. I don't know if you ever shot a bow, but that requires a lot of strength, so you're not forced into melee builds. Now to Dexterity, and oh boy, Dexterity. Already it's a pretty common saving throw. It increases your initiative, it increases your armor class when anything other than a heavy armor. As I already said, it gives you ranged weapons and decent melee weapons, and access to multiple skills, including the stealth skill, which is probably the second best skill in Dungeons & Dragons. If you compare Strength and Dexterity in Dungeons & Dragons, Dexterity gives you so much more. It's not even close, and Strength starts to look pretty meek compared to fully optimized Dexterity builds. Because of all these benefits, usually every class that does not wear heavy armor benefits from investing at least somewhat in Dexterity, and it's rarely a dumb step because of that, even if your class technically does not require it. In Ishanekon World Shapers, Dexterity increases your evasion, but that's about it. It's still a decent weapon stat. Many weapons like dagger, sword, short bows and so on require a high Dexterity to wield, but that puts it on the same level as Strength. So now it's not the obviously overpowered option. Continuing with Constitution. Oh boy, Constitution. It's not just the most common saving throw, but it has the most busted bonus of giving you extra HP per level, making it kinda vital to take. If you dump Constitution, you will be very frail compared to other characters and you will feel it. So no character can really afford dumping this stat without severely hampering their effectiveness. It is by far the most important stat, which should not be dumped ever if you want a somewhat efficient build. If you compare it to Ishanekon World Shapers, Constitution gives you a flat bonus to your Vitality, which is HP in my system. So it does not have this scaling effect of granting you massive amounts of extra HP on higher levels. It also boosts your maximum temporary Vitality, and it is, together with Will, the most common saving throw, or defense roll, how it's called in my system. So it kind of compensates for the weaker bonus, because compared to what the other stats give you, it is weaker. Just a flat amount of Vitality, especially on higher levels. But that balances each other out, so now it's viable to have a lower stat in it. You will feel it, just like with every other stat, but it's not a must take. Now let's continue with the mental stats. Intelligence. Oh man, intelligence. How they massacred my boy. It's borderline useless unless you're a wizard or artificer. It's a rare saving throw, and most of the skills that you get from it are not really that useful. I mean, Arcana is a bit useful when trying to identify magical traps and items, but depending on your game, the knowledge skills can be borderline useless. You would say, but hey, I can learn about enemies and weaknesses to exploit. But let's be honest, Dungeons and Dragons creatures are usually designed without weaknesses to exploit. So at best, you usually just know which damage types to avoid, which they are resistant or immune against. With this, intelligence pretty much becomes the universal dump stat, unless you're playing as a character that uses it as a casting ability score. What did I do in my system? First of all, intelligence gives you skill points. And in my system, using skill points is way more important than having a high stat value in that stat. Unlike Dungeons and Dragons, where an ability score and being proficient in the same stat is roughly equal value. So those skill points matter. But you would say, okay, but that only helps you if you want to be a skill monkey. If I want to focus on combat, why do you need extra skill points? But actually, there are a multitude of skills that help you directly in combat. There are 5 skills that increase your initiative in Ishanekon World Shapers. There are 7 stats that increase your defense rolls, and 1 stat that increases your narrative momentum. All of which are very useful in combat. So even if you're playing a 100% combat focused character, you can still profit from the extra skill points, making intelligence a very viable option. Also, many of the intelligence-based skills in Ishanekon World Shapers are some of the best crafting skills, buffing them that way. And also, in Ishanekon World Shapers, creatures usually have weaknesses that you can exploit, making it far more valuable to have knowledge about them and using it against them. Not to mention, every skill grants you access to specific lesser and greater talents. And intelligence has some very great ones like history, which allows you to reroll dice because you learn from your mistakes, and so on. Let's continue with wisdom. First of all, the word wisdom is confusing for many newer players. Of course, we're probably more veterans, we understand the nuances difference between intelligence and wisdom. I've seen it often enough for many new players, it is really confusing. And also, wisdom is far more valuable than intelligence. It's one of the common saving throws. And not only is it one of the most common saving throws, it's one of the saving throws against some of the most devastating effects that can take you completely out of combat for multiple turns. And it has the most important skill in the entire game. Perception, including some other very useful skills like insight and survival. With that in mind, if you're playing a martial character, it's usually way more efficient to put your few less ability score points into wisdom instead of intelligence. What did I do in my system? First of all, there is no wisdom stat. It's called instinct in my system, which represents your ability to act without thinking. It's now no longer one of the most common defense rolls, just as common as most other stats. And the one bonus that it grants you is increasing your initiative, taking that from Dexterity. It's still pretty useful, and you definitely notice the tactical advantages of going first in combat. But it's no longer more valuable than intelligence. And finally, charisma. Charisma is probably the most valuable of all the ability scores that are not one of the common saving throws, just because the power of persuasion is pretty strong. It is decently balanced, to be honest. If you want to be a charismatic character, you take it. If not, you don't take it, without losing too much. So I guess I'll give you that. In Ishanekon World Shapers, charisma also increases your narrative momentum. Narrative momentum can be used for cinematic actions and re-rolling dice to really lean into that hero persona. So in a nutshell, dexterity is better than strength, wisdom is better than intelligence, constitution is a must pick, and only charisma is really somewhat balanced compared to all the other stats. In my system, every stat gives you something that is valuable, even if your archetype itself does not require you to wield this stat, making no stat an obvious dumb stat, and making it as dumb stat having significant drawbacks, so that it might be more intelligent to spread it out or not. Your choice. Both things are viable. If you want to check out Ishanekon World Shapers, it's 100% free. You can find it on the official website, link in the description below. And if you want to try it out yourself, we have a Discord group where we organize games, one-shots and so on. Or you can join Ishanekon Arena, where each month we stream a game where anybody who wants to try out the game is invited, and you face some themed challenges. The next one will be Alien Invasion, 20th of July. I hope this video was informative for you, and that you are willing to give Ishanekon World Shapers a try. Trust me, you won't regret it. See you around in the next video. Bye!